My neighbor left me a key before he disappeared. It opened a room inside my house. Original fictional Reddit-style story for narration. The night before my neighbor disappeared, he gave me a key. It was old, heavy, and darkened around the edges. It didn't look like a key for a modern door. Arthur closed my fingers around it and said, "If anyone tells you I left voluntarily, don't believe them." I thought he was confused. Arthur was 76. He lived alone and sometimes forgot where he had placed his glasses, even when they were hanging from his shirt. I asked what the key opened. He looked past me toward the staircase leading to my basement. "A room inside your house," he said. I told him there was no locked room in my house. Arthur answered, "That's what the plans are supposed to make you think." The following morning, his front door was open, his car was gone, and Arthur had vanished. My name is Rachel. I'm 36 years old. I bought my house 14 months ago after the end of my marriage. It's a narrow brick row house built in 1924. The floors tilt slightly, the pipes complain whenever someone showers, and none of the doors close properly during humid weather. I loved it immediately. After 10 years of living in homes chosen with my ex-husband, I wanted something that belonged only to me. The neighborhood was old but changing quickly. Small family-owned shops were being replaced by expensive cafes, and developers had begun purchasing entire sections of the street. My house was one of 6 connected row houses that had not yet been renovated. Arthur lived directly beside me. He had owned his house for more than 50 years. Our first conversation happened while I was struggling to remove a rusted mailbox. Arthur appeared carrying a screwdriver and told me I was turning the screws in the wrong direction. I wasn't, but I let him help anyway. He knew everything about the buildings. He knew which pipes had been replaced, which chimneys were blocked, and where the original electrical lines ran. Arthur said he had worked as a municipal building surveyor before retiring. Whenever something broke, he arrived before I had time to call a contractor. He could be suspicious and stubborn, but he was also kind. During my first winter in the house, he shoveled my steps every morning before I woke up. The only subject that consistently changed his mood was Calder Urban Development. Calder had purchased 3 houses at the opposite end of the row. The company planned to combine them into luxury rentals. Shortly after I moved in, a representative named Simon Price offered to buy my house. The offer was considerably higher than what I had paid. I refused. Simon returned 2 weeks later with a larger offer. When I refused again, he smiled and said, "Old houses usually became more expensive than their owners expected." Arthur watched the conversation from his porch. After Simon left, Arthur told me never to allow Calder's inspectors into my basement. I asked why. He said, "Because they don't inspect problems, they create them." I assumed this was part of a long-running disagreement between an elderly resident and a developer changing his neighborhood. Then strange things began happening. Someone reported that my back steps were unsafe. A city inspector arrived and ordered repairs, although the steps had passed an inspection when I purchased the house. My basement flooded after an exterior drainage pipe was turned toward my foundation. The gas company received an anonymous report claiming I had an illegal connection. Each problem cost money. None was serious enough to force me out, but together they made owning the house exhausting. Arthur believed Calder was responsible. He showed me newspaper articles about homeowners in nearby neighborhoods who had experienced similar problems before selling to the company. I asked whether he had contacted the police. He said the police considered everything a civil dispute. I asked whether he had proof. Arthur looked at the wall separating our houses and said, "More than they know." That was all he would tell me. 3 months ago, Calder purchased another house in our row. Only Arthur's property and mine remained between 2 sections owned by the developer. Simon Price visited again. This time he brought architectural plans. He described rooftop gardens, private parking, and modern interiors. He said my house was the final piece required to complete the project. I told him Arthur's house was also privately owned. Simon smiled. "Mr. Bell is reconsidering." When I mentioned this to Arthur, he became furious. He said he would die inside his house before selling it to Calder. I told him Simon might only have been trying to pressure me. Arthur said pressure was how everything started. The night he gave me the key, Arthur knocked on my door shortly after 11. He was wearing slippers and an old coat over his pajamas. He kept looking toward the street. I asked if someone was following him. He said 2 men had been inside the empty Calder property that evening. Neither was part of the usual construction crew. Then he handed me the key in a sealed envelope. On the front, he had written, "Open only if I'm gone. Copy everything before calling anyone." I asked again what the key opened. Arthur told me to move the metal shelving behind my basement furnace. There was supposed to be a steel plate set into the brick wall. The key would open it. I asked why a door in my basement used his key. Arthur said the door was older than either of us. Before I could ask more, he walked back to his house. I considered calling his niece. Her telephone number was attached to Arthur's refrigerator for emergencies. I decided to wait until morning. That decision still bothers me. At 7:30 the next day, I noticed Arthur's front door was open. His newspaper was lying on the steps. I crossed the porch and called his name. No one answered. The living room lights were on. A cup of tea sat on the table. Arthur's wallet was beside it. His coat, the one he had worn to my house, was hanging near the door. His car was gone. I called his niece, Rebecca. She arrived an hour later and contacted the police. The officer searched the house. Arthur's passport and a small suitcase were missing. His computer contained a hotel reservation made shortly after midnight. According to the reservation, Arthur had booked a room nearly 400 miles away. One officer suggested he had taken an unexpected trip. Rebecca said her uncle hated traveling and couldn't drive at night because of his eyesight. The officer asked whether Arthur had shown signs of memory loss. That question shaped the rest of the conversation. Once Arthur became a confused elderly man, every strange detail had an easy explanation. The open door, the untouched tea, the missing passport, even the fact that he left his wallet behind. I didn't mention the key. I remembered the words on the envelope, "Copy everything before calling anyone." That evening, I locked every door and went into the basement. The furnace stood against the wall shared with Arthur's house. Moving the metal shelving exposed a rectangular section of brick that didn't match the surrounding wall. 4 bolts held a steel plate in place. The bolts had been painted to resemble rust, but they turned easily. Behind the plate was a narrow black door. The key fit. I expected to find a small cupboard or access space. Instead, the door opened into a passage. It was approximately 3 feet wide and tall enough to stand inside. Electrical cables and old pipes ran along the ceiling. A string of battery-powered lights disappeared into the darkness. The air smelled of dust and damp concrete. I almost closed the door. Then I saw fresh footprints on the floor. Someone had used the passage recently. I followed it for about 20 feet. The passage ended at another steel door. Beyond it was a room. The room should not have existed. According to the plans I received when purchasing the house, my basement extended to the exterior wall. But this space sat between my house and Arthur's, hidden behind false walls on both sides. There was a desk, a chair, and several filing cabinets. Maps covered one wall. Photographs covered another. A dehumidifier hummed in the corner, powered by an extension cable running toward Arthur's property. This was not an abandoned room. Arthur had been using it. The envelope he gave me contained a letter. "Rachel, if you're reading this, Calder has finally decided I know too much. This room was built as part of a maintenance corridor connecting all 6 houses. It allowed workers to reach the original heating and water systems without entering the homes. The entrances were supposedly sealed during renovations in the 1960s. They weren't. Calder discovered the corridor years ago. They have used it to enter properties, create damage, and frighten owners into selling. I have spent 8 years collecting proof. Make copies, send them to every address on the final page. Do not assume a uniform makes someone trustworthy. The filing cabinets contain records for dozens of properties, inspection reports, repair invoices, photographs of damaged pipes and electrical panels, statements from former homeowners. Several reported hearing footsteps inside their walls. Others found doors unlocked or belongings moved. Calder purchased nearly every property within months of those complaints. One file contained photographs of a burned apartment building. The fire had been officially blamed on old wiring. Arthur's notes identified a Calder subcontractor who entered the building through a connected basement the previous evening. Another file contained recordings. Arthur had hidden small microphones inside the corridor. On one recording, Simon Price discussed what he called a pressure schedule. A second man listed repairs, anonymous complaints, and utility interruptions planned for specific addresses. One of those addresses was mine. There was an entire file labeled, Rachel Morgan, property 18C. Inside were copies of my mortgage documents, work schedule, and divorce records. There were photographs of me viewing the house before I purchased it. Calder had known who I was before I moved in. Arthur's notes explained why. The company arranged the sale through a real estate agency secretly financed. They wanted an individual buyer to renovate the property and increase its value. Once the renovations were complete, Calder intended to create enough problems that the owner would sell quickly. I hadn't bought a house that happened to stand in Calder's way. I had been selected. At the bottom of my file was a printed schedule. The first phase listed code complaints and drainage damage. Those things had already happened. The second phase included gas leaks, electrical failures, and night access. Beside night access, someone had written, "Begin after Bell property secured." Bell was Arthur's surname. I photographed every page. Then I copied the recordings to my laptop. The final page of Arthur's letter listed 3 email addresses. One belonged to his niece, another belonged to an attorney. The third belonged to an investigative journalist named Meena Patel. I sent the files to all 3. The upload was nearly finished when I heard the basement door open. Someone had entered my house. I switched off the room's lights. Footsteps moved slowly across the basement floor. I heard the shelving being dragged away from the wall. Someone tried the hidden door. I had locked it behind me. A man's voice said, "The plate's open." Another voice answered from farther away. Then she found it. The handle moved again. I backed away from the door. The hidden room had a second exit leading toward Arthur's basement, but it was blocked by a filing cabinet. I pushed the cabinet aside as quietly as possible. Behind it was another narrow door. It opened into the continuation of the maintenance corridor. The passage was darker and lower than the first section. I crawled. Behind me, metal scraped against metal. The men were trying to force open the door. I moved toward Arthur's house. After several feet, I heard a tapping sound. 3 taps, a pause, then 3 more. I followed the sound to a small service hatch. Arthur was on the other side. He was sitting on the floor of an old cold storage room beneath his house. His face was bruised and one ankle was badly swollen, but he was alive. 2 men had entered his house shortly after he returned from giving me the key. They demanded the archive. Arthur escaped into the maintenance corridor, but one of the men followed him. During the struggle, Arthur fell and injured his ankle. He managed to lock himself inside the coal room. The men couldn't open the hatch, so they blocked the exterior door and left him there. They took his car, passport, and suitcase. They also used his computer to create the hotel reservation. The goal was to make his disappearance look voluntary long enough to search both houses and remove the evidence. Arthur had been trapped for more than 30 hours. There was an old water pipe inside the room, but he had no food or telephone. I tried the exterior door. It wouldn't move. Something heavy had been placed against it. The voices inside my basement became louder. Arthur whispered that there was another passage leading to the alley. We moved through the coal room and entered a section of the maintenance corridor that continued behind the remaining houses. Arthur could barely walk. I supported him while we moved. The corridor ended beneath a metal grate behind an abandoned shop. The grate had been secured from outside. We were trapped between the locked grate and the men searching the houses behind us. Then my phone vibrated. Meena Patel, the journalist, had replied to my email. She wrote, "I have the files. Police and cameras are on the way. Stay hidden." I had forgotten that Arthur's archive included my address. Meena didn't wait to verify everything before acting. She contacted an officer she trusted and drove to the street with a camera operator. Within 15 minutes, we heard sirens. The men searching my house attempted to leave through the back door. One escaped. The other was detained in the alley. He worked for a private security company contracted by Calder. Police found Arthur's car parked inside one of the developer's empty garages. His suitcase and passport were in the trunk. A heavy cabinet had been pushed against the coal room door. The hidden archive could no longer be dismissed as the confused obsession of an elderly man. Too many cameras were present, too many people had copies. Arthur was taken to the hospital. I spent the rest of the night answering questions. Simon Price denied knowing anything about the men, the corridor, or the archive. Calder released a statement saying the security contractor had acted without authorization. No one believed that explanation, but proving who ordered what would take time. Update. It has been 10 months since Arthur disappeared. He now lives with Rebecca. His ankle healed, but he no longer feels safe living alone. Calder's redevelopment project has stopped. Several property acquisitions are being reviewed, and former homeowners have come forward after Mina published the investigation. I cannot discuss every detail because the case is ongoing. The man detained behind my house has been charged in connection with Arthur's confinement and the break-in. The second man was identified several weeks later. Simon Price no longer works for Calder, although the company continues to insist that senior management knew nothing about the pressure campaigns. Arthur finds that claim insulting. The city inspected the entire row of houses. The maintenance corridor was real. Sections had been sealed, reopened, and modified repeatedly over the decades. Calder's contractors had access points inside 3 supposedly vacant properties. My house contained 4 hidden vents and 2 removable wall panels I had never noticed. One panel opened behind a cabinet in my kitchen. For months, I couldn't sleep without checking it. I considered selling the house. Then I realized that was exactly what Calder had always expected me to do. Instead, I renovated the basement. The hidden archive room is no longer hidden. I removed the false wall and turned the space into a small office. Arthur gave me the old key. It hangs inside a frame above my desk beside his original letter. He apologized for not warning me sooner. Arthur knew the real estate agency had connections to Calder. He suspected the company intended to pressure whoever purchased the house. He could have told me on the first day. Instead, he waited because he was afraid I would sell immediately, leaving him alone between Calder-owned properties. Part of me is still angry about that. Arthur used my ignorance to protect his position. His reasons were better than Calder's, but he still made a decision about my safety without asking me. He understands why I haven't completely forgiven him. We speak every Sunday. He says forgiveness should never be another thing an old man pressures me into giving. The strangest part is how normal the house feels now. The floors still tilt. The pipes still complain. The doors still stick when the weather changes. But I know where the walls end. I know what exists behind them. Before Arthur disappeared, I believed locked rooms were frightening because of what might be inside. I was wrong. The most dangerous rooms are the ones powerful people convince everyone do not exist. Once the door is open, they are only rooms. And now I have the key.